All right, well, we're going to get started. It is the third Thursday of September 2019, and welcome everyone to the US Web Design System monthly call. I think we've got a great show for you today, and I'm excited that everyone is able to be here today in the beautiful month of September. Hey there, my name is Dan Williams, and I'm the project lead for the US Web Design System. I'm based out in Portland, Oregon, but I'm excited that I have the opportunity to talk to people all across the country. What we've got coming up today is pretty good. I think we've got some team updates coming up, a few product updates as well. And then the meat of what we're going to be talking about today is we're going to be looking at developing a component. And then after we do a little bit of looking through that process, we'll have hopefully a good opportunity for some questions and answers as well. So without any further ado, let's get started. First, some team updates. If you've been following along with the US Web Design System team over the last few monthly calls, you'll know that we're kind of in a team transition right now, and we're working on staffing up again to start some real development work very, very soon. And hopefully by the end of the month, we should have a real development team together. You know, for a long time, it's been mostly just me down there, but now I'm happy to say that we have two new interns on the US Web Design System project, student interns through a State Department program. So I'd like to welcome Jay Lin and Mariel Quintana to the team. They have already started helping me with some work on some important bug fixes, and I'm hoping that we'll be doing a lot of work soon. And I apologize for how I emojified you down there. I'll do better next time. But we've also got some product updates today as well. And just a little bit more on the team. I think we are hopeful that by the end of September, we're going to have even a little bit more dev firepower, and we're really going to be starting to get to work. But we do have some product updates today. Yesterday, we released USWDS 2.2.0. And that has a few good things in it, a bunch of bug fixes and improvements for the most part. The extended mega menu now works. There was a bug that came into 2.1 that had some issues with the extended version of the mega menu, and that extended mega menu is now back in action, and I don't know if it's better than ever, but it's the same as ever it was. The primary nav indicators are now aligned. It's kind of a small one, but one of those nice ones that's good to get through just for the feeling of satisfaction you get from solving a teeny tiny problem. There was kind of an issue with the way the little blue bars underneath nav items in the primary nav appeared, where they were just a couple pixels off, depending on whether that nav item had a submenu or not, or also the current page indicator. They were just like off by little pixels, and it was sort of it was odd to see that. And what I think we came up with was that we were seeing some issues that were at root being caused by rounding errors in a line height calculation. So we've changed the way we've rounded for calculating line height, and now all of those little bars should just be really satisfyingly perfect. We're now making sure we use exclusively sort of role-based type tokens in our code. This means that in your USWDS project settings, you can assign what kind of typeface you want to use for certain roles. Like, say, for body text, you want to use a serif face, or for heading text, you want to use a sans serif face. We wanted to make sure that we were only using these body and heading, the role-based tokens. So we weren't using anything in code that said this is exclusively the serif typeface, because some projects might not use a serif typeface, or they might not use a sans serif typeface. They might only use one. So we're just making sure that the code works for anyone, regardless of how you have your settings established. We've also improved some things around how we've implemented ARIA in our markup. We know that in modern HTML5, it's no longer as necessary that we are redundantly marking up some ARIA roles. So we no longer need to assign a manual ARIA role to something like the header, the nav, and the footer that is assumed by HTML5. So we're removing those redundant ARIA roles, but we are adding some additional ARIA labels to disambiguate the two levels of navigation that we have in the design system. We have a primary nav, we have a secondary nav. So we're making sure that with ARIA, we are providing the proper names for the primary navigation and the secondary navigation. So folks navigating using ARIA are able to know, to point to the correct navigation. And we're doing some things where we're using consistent use of SVG assets. This is sort of, again, maybe a little bit of a small thing, but our SVG assets were kind of all over the place. There were a lot of inconsistencies with how we were saving them and like where the image sat within its bounding box. So when we were setting the size of icons, for instance, like we were getting a lot of sort of inconsistency and unexpected effects in our icons. And now we've sort of more rigorously defined how we're using SVG, and that means when we're styling something, we're getting what we expect, and we don't have to do any strange compensatory styling for weird SVG stuff. And there are a few new things that you can control in settings. We now have more reliable and sophisticated control over the maximum width of the banner and the header in settings. Previously, it was a little ambiguous, and it was a little unreliable just how you would set the max width of the banner and the header in your settings, and now that should be a little bit clearer. It's clearer in the code, and it will be clearer in the docs very, very soon. You can also now set the hero image in your settings. Previously, if you wanted to change what the hero image is for the default hero, it meant going into doing a SAS override or a CSS override. And now you can just set that image in your settings and not have to write any custom CSS to do that. Coming really soon, hopefully within the next couple of weeks, an update to our USWDS Jekyll theme, so that USWDS Jekyll will be updated to design system 2 point whatever, and it will use all the settings and styles and all of the new code in the Jekyll theme, and we'll be working to roll that out and talk about how folks who might be using the version 1 version of the Jekyll theme might be able to upgrade to version 2 of the Jekyll theme. And also coming soon, some Adobe XD design assets. Currently, our visual design assets are just in sketch format, and we realize that sketch format is not something that everyone has access to, and Sketch is only on the Mac, and we are working to get that out in an Adobe format so that those who are in the Adobe ecosystem, whether they're on a Mac or a PC, can begin to use the design assets and sticker sheets. So all of that is either out or coming up, and all sort of available through designsystem.digital.gov. Now, the meat, really, of what we're going to be talking about today is around developing a component. We have a lot of components that we, as the US Web Design System, have developed or adapted that we have as available components in the design system. But one of the intentions of the work we've done over the last year, particularly as we developed Design System 2, was to give us better, more consistent tools for building more stuff. We know we need to grow the design system. We know that there's that the design system is not a static thing. We need to add to it. We need to adapt it. We need to keep pushing forward with it. So today we're going to take a little look at a component that's at sort of an early stage that we're looking at beginning to try to incorporate, and the experience of starting on of what it means to develop a component, and then maybe transitioning into what it means to take something that you have developed on your own and begin to submit it to the web design system, what that process is all about. But to do this, we're going to talk with Jeremy Zeiler, who is the director of Digitalgov, and he is working on something really interesting, and I would love to just pass it over to him so that he can introduce himself a little bit more and talk about what he has been doing. So, Jeremy, I'm going to stop my share and throw it over to you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Dan. Yeah, so I want to talk a little bit about some work that we've been doing over on Digitalgov, and at least over and more generally also over here in the technology transformation services at the GSA. So I'm just sharing my screen for a second, so hopefully you can all see this. So you can see this, right, Dan?
I can. Okay, great.
So we have this page on Digitalgov called the Required Web Content and Links page. As it says, it's a list of required links that all federal websites need to have. And this is a page we've had on the site for a while, and it was originally developed by the Federal Web Council. And we've been working with them, which is people from a lot of different agencies, on improving this page and making it better and more clear. So in the last month or so, we did a bunch of work to reorganize the information, make the information much more clear, and make it easier to basically see what the law specifically specifies, or not the law, the policy specifically specifies. So as you see on all websites, you basically need to have some link to government customer support, privacy policy, FOIA, et cetera, and in each of the section it explains, what that link is that you need to have there, what pages it's roughly required on, and what the policy, which policy is requiring it. And we have this, and because we are using the web design system on here, we use the little accordion component to make a nifty little policy box. So specifically drill down to, so you don't need to actually download the 32-page PDF and find out where specifically in the legalese it requires it. We just kind of embed that specific spot and even highlight it for you to make it, hopefully make it more clear. So this, I think, in a lot of ways gets us closer to having some guidance that people can use, but doesn't really solve the problem of like, well, where should these go and how should these be more clear? And actually something that I should note as a caveat that we've been wanting to change, but didn't want to change without really thinking this through a little bit, is the required link text. And required link text is actually not required for a lot of these. So if you read the law, the link text that's specific is not mentioned. It's with the exception of one of them, and that's the No Fear Act data link. So that's the only one that specifies the specific text that needs to be in the link. The rest of them, it's kind of a holdover from the earlier version of this page that just suggests that you link to budget and performance or USAgov. But some of the problems with that is when you link to USAgov, it's not really communicating a whole lot to users, like what is that or why would I go there. Same for linking to like the Inspector General or whatnot. Like why would you link to the Office of the Inspector General? Is he, so how is there opportunity to make those things more clear, and where do they go on the page? So we just set out to take a look first at just a number of sites that we have over here in TTS within the Office of Products and Programs, and start looking at some of that. So I'm gonna just go through a quick little presentation. So if you have questions, toss them in the chat, and we'll be answering questions right after this. So, so this was ultimately like us saying, well, how can we make footers better across the site, across a number of websites, and can we do something? But then I'll get to anchor in a second and what anchor means. So if you look at a lot of the footers across websites that we have in TTS, you'll see people are doing a lot of work to pack in a bunch of information across sites. So here's one from, I believe, this thing's in my way, from .gov.gov. Here's, let's see, hold on a second. Here's one from the design system, nice, slim. Also, good question is like, where does the footer start? Where does the footer end? It's, I don't exactly know. But they have a nice slim one. It's the GSA logo there. Mentions kind of a little bit about the org, parent org charts, and I don't know where it's hosted as well. So here's one from search.gov, very contact information heavy, restates official website of the US government, site policies, USAgov, stuff like that. Here's one from data.gov, has their logo in it, privacy policies, USAgov, performance.gov, and stuff about their site and their social media links and whatnot. So here's one from accessibility.digital.gov, which we borrowed from the design system, but stuck in some buttons on how to edit the page at GitHub. And then recently we updated the footer on digital.gov and basically use the vanilla out of the box footer components that were available in the web design system. And specifically that's in this area here where you have the links to, like, stuff in our site that it's like an extended, a little bit better organized site map for people. But we did extend this bottom bar and kind of did some down here because we needed to put the GSA logo in here and do little extra different type work down here. But all of this bring between the required links and some needs we have on our site to make things a little bit more clear. It's like, well, where do these logos go, and how do you better organize a lot of this? Oh, and here's the main GSA site. So so this was just a project or an idea of moving towards just greater unity among like a family of sites that we have over here. And the first step towards kind of cleaning up footers overall was just to organize like with like. So looking at all the information in there and just seeing, let's keep things relatively organized. So just I wrote out a few little goals. Can we design a footer that incorporates all of the required links, and logic for can we design a footer that includes the right logic for acknowledging the org structure, sort of that what you need to communicate in there. and does a better job of elevating customer support for USA.gov out of a link. So, and then maybe if we do a decent job, like other agencies will want to use it, or maybe it's something we would want to submit as a component to the web design system. So we started out with just saying, well, let's look at the broad areas. There is this thing called, and I should have updated this here, but there's a site footer and navigation, right? This is your about page. This is like how to posts, news, stuff that's actually in your site. This is links to those deeper things. And then at the time when I was first making this, I was thinking, well, maybe there's a separate little area that we can just put all agency affiliation type stuff, you know, like who is what organization does this website sit under? And then what organization does that organization sit under, and so on and so forth. And how do you communicate that to somebody? And then maybe there's this idea that we can, like the top bar that goes across government sites, the government banner with the flag, maybe there's something that we could do across the bottom that is like more government-wide customer support that's for answering bigger questions. So if the top starts at the widest possible thing of the whole government, you know, maybe it narrows down in the middle, and then at the bottom widens back out again to be the whole government. So it's a bit like a sandwich or Oreo cookie metaphor. So so again, just to make this a little bit more clear, let's just say that this here, this area here is the footer. And what we'll be talking about, what we realized that we were exploring is less about like this stuff here and more about like, well, where do we put required links and kind of organize the more structured information. So that is what we're calling the anchor right now. So this is an exploration of what this sort of that bottom, those bottom two little pieces might look like. So we start off with just pointing out, well, this is the agency that makes this site possible. So we're here at the GSA, so we put the GSA logo there. But it's important to note that, like, you know, this should be the only logo or mark or spot of color in the agency footer. I know there's this color here, but and it should link to the agency website. Like, there's generally not a whole lot of room for multiple logos and things. Multiple logos kind of hard. I don't know. It's something. These are just some thoughts, early thoughts on some of this. So it's important. So in the text here, it's important to restate the name of the site because the logo or the name of the site may not always be in view, given that you're at the bottom of the page. So that's important. In the text, we define the site as a product, which I think is a very helpful term that we should be using across government a lot more. And then how do you handle the org structure? You know, sometimes, I mean, we have a lot of programs that are 5 levels deep in an organization from the parent-most organization, and you don't want to represent the whole org chart, but you, from a communications perspective, generally what you're trying to do is say, well, who should be credited with making your site possible? So, and that is what I guess we're calling the primary parent org. And then a lot of times you also need to mention a secondary sort of parent org. But I don't know that there's a whole lot of room for more than that, and especially if you're communicating this type of stuff. So think about this in terms of a tweet. If somebody were like really impressed with the work that you're doing on the site, they're coming down here and they're looking at search.gov and they're thinking like, wow, this is so great. Like, oh, the technology transformation services makes this, or you know, they can use this, enough material for them to use. The whole org chart is not really useful in that case. So and then down here you can kind of point out who who's clearly doing all the work, you know, because they manage it. But you know, let's say you're still curious and you want to find out some more information, so you click on the Learn More link, and it opens up. And this is helpful too, because while the links take you there, this is a good place to expand upon a little bit of like what those sub-agencies do. And so I pulled this text directly from the GSA website for both of those. And so if the primary and secondary are there, you get the primary and secondary blurbs kind of pulled in there as well. So now over to like stuff that's a little bit more structured and gets towards the required links area. So we at the start have a little bit of a contact area to make it clear again, like what is the official email for this site. So while like I probably do have contact information all over my site, like further up the page and in the actual site footer, it's nice to just have it consistent here, especially if you're dealing with a number of sites. And so it's always predictable. And personally, I would, as somebody who runs a lot of sites, I would expect the email address here to go to be emailed by people who have questions about the domains and stuff like that. And that this is really that. This is less about like direct support for the program, but like, I don't know, these are the actual people responsible for that site. So it's important. I think it's important to spell out the email. Makes it more clear, and people still print a fair number of websites, and then spell out the URL as well. So into the required stuff, here's the link to your about page. Now, your about page is probably elsewhere in the site as well, but if you put it here, like at least this whole like anchor area can handle all of the required links and kind of keep it in a structured way. And if everybody's sort of doing sort of the same thing, it adds emphasis to that that kind of location being a place to find that. And then it's helpful to identify the parent agency again, and link to their about page, which is nice but not required. And then all of those other required links. So and down here you could see just a little effort to try to make it these links a little bit more clear. So instead of FOIA or Freedom of Information Act as the link text, they're actionable links. They're things that start with an action. So submit a FOIA request. The link to Inspector General, maybe it makes sense to do something like report fraud, waste, or abuse. And to back up a little bit, these are all pages that according to the policies, your parent agency, in our case the GSA, needs to have those pages available somewhere, and your website needs to link to them. So and so we just need to provide a link to them on your subsite. So might as well make them useful and clear for people to understand. The third one down, View No Fear Act data, is that's as I said before, that one is the only one that has required link text in it. And then View Budget and Performance Reports. So another page that your parent most agency is required to have on their site, and all of the websites are required to link to them. So let's see here. So the last section of the footer or the anchor is called I don't know, maybe the Contact the Government bar, or but let's just, the whole thinking about it is like, how do we make this a little bit more clear that if you have a question about government services, you can contact USA.gov. So it brings in the name USA.gov, which is probably helpful for associating that need, and then tells you kind of what you'll expect by clicking on that. So and maybe there's a smart way that we can link to that page with like some query parameters or something, so that USAgov can better support your site, another site in the future, stuff like that. So lastly, I wanted to point out something that I think is important, that it often crosses my mind a lot when designing something, but I don't often spell out, is how will this thing read to screen readers? And I actually feel, personally feel like the web is more akin to radio than it is to print in a lot of ways. I mean, we read left to right, and so do browsers. So when the browser or the screen reader is reading this, they're reading this just like the reader does. If it reads well, if you can speak it out loud, it has a good chance of being a good bit of text there. So I think it's helpful to look at kind of how a screen reader reads an element, and this is a bit of an approximation and that I did in the design phase, but it should read like a U.S. General Services Administration website, digital.gov or search.gov or whatever, is a product of the Technology Transformation Services and maintained by the Office of Products and Programs. Learn more, have a question about government service, contact USA.gov. Maybe it says report fraud. Like, how can we make that language feel like somebody's talking to the reader, which I think is an important thing to aim for. So so I wanted to, before we jump over to questions, there are a few things I wanted to point out. One is, this was the original kind of footer component that we pulled over for digital.gov, which as you see has all the areas where you could put your links, maybe your newsletter sign up bar, your social icons and whatnot. And here's the current footer for search.gov, which we're going to be working with to try piloting an early version of this along with a number of different sites. So why this is kind of interesting, this project is interesting, is in order to get a like this anchor on a website, you need to know a lot of things in advance. You need to know where's the code hosted, like is it hosted in GitHub, who has admin access to that code, what are the rules for pushing code to this, like there's a bunch of stuff that needs to happen, like what is the CMS, what's the templating language, how can who on the team actually has access, is knowledgeable about this type of stuff, so on and so forth, which is very valuable stuff to start to organize. And as we've found, as we are talking to people that run sites over here, this has been a valuable exercise to just start gathering a lot of that information, because it means as a larger organization, we are more nimble to be able to make changes like this kind of across sites. So we're starting a bit of a project to do that, and we're going to document that whole process, like how might a team actually gather that information, and so on and so forth, and move through the process of actually getting this on a site. So so here's a little prototype of it that I made for search.gov, and then also pulled in challenge.gov as an example. The component opens and closes, has all the text in there and whatnot. Works fairly nicely on the phone. It's probably needs a bit of work there, but and another little bit of thing that's interesting is like, let's look at the data that actually would power this. So spit out the sort of the key value pairs. So maybe the site name is search.gov, the site email. This is all very prototypey, so it's not exactly correct for search.gov, but just and if any of you have ever kind of worked a bit with data, like actually finding the right names for all these things takes a bit of work. But anyway, just finding a good way for it to pull in that data so it's flexible. And I think we're in those early stages of testing out, does this work for a number of sites? Does the language construction, is there anything else that needs to be here from the website's perspective or from a required links perspective and whatnot. And one last little bit down here is I put the Digitalgov one down at the bottom. As you can see, it stretches edge to edge, and it opens and closes as well. And I put that the web design system footer component right above it, just to kind of give you a sense of here is your area where you can sort of, color in any way you want and kind of work out stuff that's specific to your site. But maybe what if, down here at the bottom, we have something that's a little bit more structured across sites. So bit of an exploration, and it's got a lot more, I think, testing to do before it's final. So.
Cool. It's really exciting to see, Jeremy. And before we open this up for some more questions, I thought I'd talk about this a little bit more from the design system perspective, maybe give you and I an opportunity to just talk about what potential next steps might be here. But when you started to do this work, and when this work first came to my attention, I was super excited about it for a couple reasons. Like, one of the design principles of the US Web Design System is to make it easy to do the right thing, and particularly when it comes to following the law, and when it comes to following all the proper guidance. Like, we want to do things with the web design system that make it easy to follow all the policy and the law. So when I saw this, it was like, okay, this is a great kind of solution, because it builds a lot of policy compliance sort of right into a component. And I was excited about how it might exist similarly to the Gov banner that we have on the top, as a couple like very common components that you could see going between lots of different sites that sort of very clearly establish the site as a government website at the top of the page, and then at the bottom of the page, very clearly and consistently sort of give a little bit more context and link out in all the appropriate ways to all the places where people will learn to expect to go at the bottom of a website. So I thought there were a lot of things about this that made it particularly interesting in the context of the web design system. And so I'm sort of looking forward to see where this goes, and to begin to think about what we might be able to do as the web design system to work in connection with you to help build it and help test it and help integrate it into the design system, because that is one of our strong intentions going forward with the design system, is that we want to be developing a good, strong intake system, as well as distributing the components that we have. We want to be able to learn from what folks are building on their own and bring those things back into the system. So this is really exciting to see. It opens, I think it opens the door to a lot of different kinds of questions, some of which we can answer, some of which we can't answer quite as well, I think. But from my perspective, the question begins to be, what do we begin to do now from the design system side to think about what it would take to bring it into the web design system. So that's kind of thinking through what is specifically that sort of intake process.
Yeah.
What do we check for? What are we going to do? What do we expect of folks who are submitting components and ideas? And that's really something that's in the very sort of early stages. We have our own design principles that we have on our website, and those kind of form the broad picture of our sort of evaluative criteria. Put user needs first, make it easy to do the right thing. Accessibility is fundamental. Start from existing solutions. Be consistent, not static, and share what you do. So this is definitely a part of sharing what you do, and this it's really good to see a component at this stage of development. And now it's our job to sort of begin to develop to sort of checklistize that a little bit. And I've been thinking of this as some of these evaluative criteria as clear, accessible, resilient, efficient, and documented, and how we go through and look at all of those things, and how we do some small additional checklists within those criteria. But that's the next step for the design system. How do we begin to accept this back into the design system and work with teams to translate something that they've built into something that we will publish as a default component? So yeah, do you have any other questions for me, Jeremy, before we open it up to other questions from the group?
I would like to just just mention a few questions, because you mentioned that this raises a lot more questions about what it means to integrate a component into the design system. And as somebody that works across a lot of sites, or as a designer, I know I would want to, I know that a lot of this is really tricky, and not tricky from a code standpoint, but tricky more from a communications standpoint, and making sure that the right things are kind of conveyed. And so personally, even just as we have the challenge of trying to get it across a number of sites within TTS that's within the GSA, that itself is a bit tricky as well. So I'm interested in seeing how the structure, what this communicates, works, and where it needs to be flexible, and where it needs to be, where that structure can actually help make things consistent and guide people, if that makes sense. So I will point out that recently, we launched pra.digital.gov, and we had, and these are problems that or challenges that you end up dealing with comms teams as you're kind of organizing how to give credit to things. So here we worked with OIRA at in OMB on this, and we had to come together with some language and how to improve the site on GitHub, and fit that together. But here we got two logos that so maybe there is a spot for two logos on things, and what is the thinking around it, and how does that change the language? How do you make that clear to somebody who can't see these logos, stuff like that? And how do you indicate the relationship? Who's the, if this site has a problem, am I contacting somebody at OMB, or am I contacting somebody at digital.gov? I think about that a lot. So same with plainlanguage.gov as well. Who's responsible if the site needs a security update or something? That's actually going to be us over at digital.gov. So, and it's not clear in the footer, stuff like that, and just making sure can this be a much more utilitarian space? That said, it's less problematic being down here at the footer to make some structural changes than it is trying to say, hey, let's standardize the tops of all the pages. across sites, because then you get into a much more difficult, kind of tricky space.
So Jeremy, there are a couple of questions from the chat here.
Yeah.
One is a question from Renee, who sort of asks around like how you might be working with a web council to work to understand your solution here. Like, how are you working with the web council with the work you're doing here, if at all?
So we worked with them on the required links page and the information here, and just getting a lot of feedback from them. And there was just so many people that as we made edits and we're sending them edits, like, does this make it more clear? How does this solve your problem? Like, a lot of the people on the web council deal with the legal teams that are coming to them saying, hey, we need this thing on the site. And they were very clear that, you know, which policy is requiring this, because I need to see that. And, you know, they need to have that, be able to effectively have that conversation with the legal teams on what that text is and what it should say. And then ultimately, then they need to go back and try to integrate it into their site and into the place, which sometimes requires moving furniture around a bit. So, and they just need to know, like, where are they in control of things, or where is policy dictating those decisions, and make that more clear. So that's what we're trying to do here. And then we did run an earlier version of this footer by them and got a lot of feedback from them about how to, you know, go about this. But there's still, I think, still a lot more feedback yet to go. And personally, I feel like you don't start learning anything, or that you start learning the most when it's actually live on a bunch of sites and people start asking questions about, well, how do we add this or that there? And then it's starting to evaluate those needs.
So a follow-on regarding, you know, policy and testing from Abigail. Are we fully complying with the law if the required links are hidden until the user presses the button, and presumably can't be found with in-page search until you press the Learn More button?
That is a good question. I don't know the answer to that. And I didn't think about, like, in-page search being something that was necessary in that sense. But it's a good question. I mean, I'd like to hear what you think about that, or if there's a better way to go about it.
Yeah, but in general, I would say the intention with this, the research we'll need to do and the feedback we'll need to get is to make it so that we are fulfilling the policy and the law with this component. That's the intention, and
Yeah.
and if we're not doing it, then the component isn't working properly. So so that's the kind of research and feedback we need to get to make sure that we are providing the right kind of thing. There is a question in the chat that's outside of the scope of what we're talking about here, which is around how to import Google Fonts into the design system. It's unfortunately it might be a little too involved to get into right here, but I would suggest maybe you could email USWDS at GSA.gov, and that's something we might be able to get on either via email, or it's a question that you could open via a issue on our GitHub repo in the USWDS/USWDS repo on GitHub. It's a little bit more in depth than we can go into here. It's not. We'd have to work through it. It's not as easy as I would hope it would be. So I think with that, we were thinking that we could open up, unlock folks for asking questions with their audio if they want, or if you prefer to type it into the chat, you can type it into the chat. We have about 7 minutes remaining, so if anyone wants to wants to speak up to ask a question or add one to the chat, that would be great. Abigail says in the chat, few ideas. It would be great to link to USWDS derived or related design systems and pattern libraries like USAgov so we can look at the components that they've built. That is a great idea, and I do think that we want to work to, in conjunction, USWDS and Digitalgov really working together to point people to all of these resources. There are a lot of resources out there that are useful from a design system perspective or a service design perspective or a strategic perspective or an implementation perspective. There are all kinds of teams doing all sorts of interesting things. I don't know about them. Jeremy and Digitalgov might not know about them, but when we hear about them from folks like you, we should be doing a better job at collecting them and presenting them as contextual resources. I totally agree.
Always drop links to those things in the USWDS public channel in Slack if you got them, and it'll help us to better integrate a lot of this. So.
Does anyone else have anything that they want to ask around the world of developing and integrating components with the design system? Jeremy, do you have any resources on Digitalgov around pointing to, let's just say, research techniques or other ways that you might collect feedback around components?
We do have a fair number of things around usability sessions that you can do with people on usability tests. So I would imagine that would be an importance as I'm thinking through kind of, well, how do I test this thing beyond passing it by various people in communication roles and making sure they feel like they understand this. So it's like, how does a reader actually like come to understand this is really important. And I think we're definitely going to find good ways to do some usability tests around them. So,
because yeah, I think there's a lot of potential in this component, and there's a lot of important stress testing to do, because I think, you know, if folks are looking to integrate the web design system and looking to do it in a sort of incremental way, like I think adding something like the Gov banner at the top and adding something like this anchor at the bottom is a good way to just get your foot in the door and begin to check a few things off your list to get those required content links, check marks like checked off just by sort of adding one component at the bottom of the page seems like an important, easy step forward.
I do think something I'd like to do as we start to develop our path or process for updating these updating sites over here in TTS to all use a consistent, you know, version of the web design system and use the Gov banner and use the anchor in its in whatever first form it is. I think we're going to be sharing a lot of that documentation out and kind of trying to let it be a place where others can kind of learn from going through that process. Because as I said, it's I actually think a lot of the value in doing this is the steps it takes to get it onto the site, and that like it helps you get your house in order. So.
I want to surface a couple things from the chat so it's available to anyone who's watching this later. Another suggestion from Abigail is to have some kind of ability to suggest a component by linking to it in another design system or a USWDS derived one, and to be able to vote on it or have some sort of to vote on submitted components as we would use this on our sites if it was moved into the USWDS core, so we can gauge the community interest. Sorry to paraphrase, I shouldn't have tried to even paraphrase. But Yeah, that's also a really great idea, and I think that that's something that we can even begin to implement right now through the mechanism of GitHub issues, and that we could do a better job of surfacing those kinds of GitHub issues in our public Slack, in email, in some other forum, so that folks know, hey, there's an issue on USWDS that's like, hey, we'd love to add the tab component. We see that they have it at CMS, and we want to bring it over here. And then we can say, hey, USWDS public, are these things interesting to you? That feels like a way we could do it right now with the tools we already have, but that is the kind of exposure and sort of feedback loop that we want to be able to establish. Dean says, when we say component, we're talking about a CSS or HTML pattern and not a web component, correct? Yes, that is correct. When we're saying component here, we're kind of talking about this CSS, HTML, JavaScript kind of all together to have one functional unit on a web page or digital product. We're not specifically talking about a web component, though there's a lot that's interesting and good to think about in the world of web components. That's not where we are right now. We have 2 minutes remaining. If anyone else has anything else they'd like to ask or add to the chat, I'm happy to try to answer that. I will, until that moment, though, put up our USWDS contact information. So we do have a public Slack, USWDS public, that you can get to by submitting an application at, I believe, chat.18f.gov. Though DGU support will correct me if I'm wrong. We also have a mailing list that you can subscribe to. We also have an email address, uswds@gsa.gov. Our GitHub is here, and of course, designsystem.digital.gov is where all of our documentation and other web resources live. And this is your opportunity to speak now. I would like to say thank you for me, and I'd also like to thank Jeremy for being here and to be able to walk us through what he's been doing and this thought process. I always think it's interesting to see things when they're in progress. That's far more interesting usually than just lifting the silver lid off of the platter to see what has been served to you. So I hope everyone has a great rest of the month of September, and we will see you again on the 3rd Thursday of October. Thanks so much. I appreciate it.